Hello and welcome to the ALS Research and Clinical Trials 101 webinar. My name is David Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Research and Strategic Partnerships at ALS Canada, and I'm joined here by my colleagues who will introduce themselves. Colleen?
Everyone, my name is Colleen Doyle, and I'm the Director of Canadian Research at ALS Canada. I've been with the organization for over 7 years, but I've been in the ALS field for a total of 13 years. Before joining ALS Canada, I worked in the lab as a fundamental researcher, first when I was completing my master's degree, and then later as I continued on as a research assistant, where I studied the misfolding and aggregation of an ALS-linked protein you may have heard of called superoxide dismutase, or SOD1. When the opportunity arose back in 2017, I joined the team at ALS Canada, which has led me to have the privilege on being on this webinar today. And we just really hope that you find the information shared today useful. And I'll turn it over to Carolina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Young. I'm research specialist here at ALS Canada, and I've been with the organization for close to 3 years. I also have a background in science in the lab, although not ALS specifically. So to start us off, before our team dives into giving this introduction about research and ALS clinical trials, we wanted to talk briefly about why we're even doing this. We know that navigating ALS research and clinical trials can be overwhelming, and we're ultimately here to support you as you begin to navigate this information and learn more about research and clinical trial participation, and if trial participation is right for you. We hope this presentation helps you, and if you ever have any questions, our team holds monthly Q&A sessions, usually every third Wednesday of every month, but please check our schedule on our webinars page on our website. And during the sessions, we are available to just answer any questions and chat about research with you and anyone affected by ALS. So we encourage you to drop by our next Q&A drop-in for any questions that you might have, either related to this presentation or not. All questions are welcomed, and we're also available via email if you want to connect as well. So to start us off, I would just go over a little bit of info on what is ALS, which you might also have heard as Lou Gehrig's disease. So ALS affect the motor neurons. Motor neurons are the specialized cells within our bodies that you can think of as the internal wiring or the messengers that allow the brain to send signals to our muscles to control voluntary movement. So in ALS, these motor neurons gradually break down and die. Other cells that surround the motor neurons are also affected, such as a type of cell called glial. Glial cells support, nourish, and protect the neurons. So changes to the glial cells also contribute to the death of motor neurons in ALS. And as they die, this means that the brain can no longer communicate with the muscles of the body. This is why over time, someone living with ALS may also lose the ability to walk, talk, eat, swallow, and eventually breathe. Currently, researchers are still trying to understand what causes disease for all the individuals affected. We do know that approximately 5 to 10% of individuals with ALS will have a family history, meaning that multiple family members have been affected by the disease. In this case, it is often termed familial ALS and is most likely caused by a variation in a gene related to the disease. Over 40 genes have been identified as being linked to ALS, but the ones you see here on the screen are the 4 most common causes of genetic ALS and make up the majority of cases. You might have also heard the terms familial versus sporadic ALS to refer to ALS. So sporadic ALS is meant to refer to an individual that doesn't have a family history of the disease. And that might give the impression that it's an isolated case in the family, in the population, and they don't have a genetic component. However, some experts in the field are actually trying to move away from the term sporadic because for some cases, they have a genetic variant as well. It is estimated that this is the case for 11 to 16% of people affected by seemingly sporadic ALS. So for these individuals, they might have acquired a spontaneous variant throughout their lives, so it wasn't inherited from their parents, thus why they don't have a family history, or most likely their family history information was just lacking. Maybe their family members never got an ALS diagnosis, or the disease just didn't manifest in other family members because an individual might have the gene variant, but that doesn't always mean 100% that they will develop symptoms of the disease. So it is important to emphasize that even individuals without an apparent family history might also have a gene variant linked to ALS. If you're interested in learning more about ALS genetics, you can access our ALS Canada Gene Hub, which is a dedicated area on our website to talk more information on these genes, genetic counseling, genetic testing, and links to other resources from other organizations as well. So getting into ALS research, we have 2 main goals. One is to treat and someday cure ALS, and two is to manage ALS more effectively in people who have been diagnosed already. And within this research, there are mainly three main types. The first one that we start with is basic research, which is also known as fundamental research. This is the type of research that is conducted in the lab, with the goal of better understanding ALS and discovering new ways to treat it. In the lab, researchers will often use models to study ALS, like cellular or animal models. In ALS, common animal models you see in the lab are rat and mice models, but we also have researchers that can use zebrafishes, C. elegans worms, and flies. But how are researchers able to model ALS in the lab in these animals or cellular models? So as I mentioned earlier, some ALS cases are known to be caused by an inherited gene variant. So these genetic discoveries have been crucial to advancing ALS research because it is those genes that they're able to try and replicate the disease symptoms in animal models. So when these gene variants are introduced in mice, for example, researchers find that they develop many of the symptoms associated with ALS, such as loss of motor function and muscle atrophy. So by introducing ALS-associated gene variants into cells, worms, fish, flies, and all of those models, researchers can now study the biology of ALS in a living system. Additionally, one of the greatest advancements in science over the past decade or so was development of something called induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPS cells, the inventors of which were actually awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine. So these cells make it possible to create essentially any cell type in the body using another one as a starting point. So this means that researchers can now take skin or blood samples from people living with ALS and convert them into motor neurons. And these cells actually retain the genetic makeup of the individual they were derived from. So these allow researchers to study human ALS in the lab for the first time. So in summary, for the basic research process, researchers will investigate changes in the lab that happen before, during, and after symptom onset by using cellular or animal models. By doing so, researchers are trying to determine on a cellular level what is happening inside the body of someone affected by ALS, how these changes may contribute to disease, and how eventually they may be able to stop this from happening to find a cure. Ultimately, the hope is to identify new treatment targets that can be tested in humans in a clinical setting. Researchers will share their findings for others in scientific community to learn from by presenting at conferences and with publications in peer-reviewed journals. To elaborate on what a scientific publication is, it is an academic paper where scientists will explain their study, what were the methods they followed, what ALS model was used, and all these details, along with our results they got in the lab and their interpretation of what these results mean for ALS. You can look for those publications on a platform such as PubMed, for example, which is a free database of articles and study abstracts, where you can find the link to the full studies publication. We know that sometimes reading those papers can be a little rough if you're not a scientist, so we have a very short guide on how to start reading them in our website. We also have a glossary of research terms that explain common terms that might be used in papers that might also be of help. And these publications is how we know researchers are being transparent in their results and that we can trust that whatever they found in the labs is hopefully driving us closer to a cure. So if you come across a potential therapy with no published articles or papers from it, or if the consensus on the paper by the scientific community is not great, that they were not fully transparent, or if they didn't interpret the data right for the results, that is an indication that their results might not be truly beneficial to ALS. So I'll pass it off to Colleen so she can explain a little bit more clinical research.
Thank you, Carolina. So clinical research aims to help our understanding of human ALS. There are a number of ongoing initiatives, both nationally and internationally, that aim to do just that. A great example of a Canadian initiative is called Capture ALS. This open science, patient-centered platform has the goal of helping researchers better understand the clinical heterogeneity of ALS by constructing one of the most biological pictures to date. Participants who enroll in the program are characterized with deep clinical phenotyping, neuroimaging, speech analyses, genotyping, and biobanking. And researchers are hopeful that by obtaining a biological fingerprint for each person living with ALS, they may be able to accelerate therapeutic development and even make personalized treatments possible. Another example is the Project Mind study, which is a global initiative that aims to map the full DNA profiles of 1,500 people living with ALS and 7,500 healthy controls. The goal of this study is to identify genes associated with the disease, which will not only help us better understand ALS, but may also lead to new treatment targets. And in the interest of time, I won't go into all of the initiatives listed here, and there are many more not listed, but each of these serve as an incredible contribution to science. So clinical trials are the type of research that you may be most familiar with, and these are designed to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of a new experimental treatment or intervention for managing a certain disease or condition. Some clinical trials focus on clinical management. These trials typically do not investigate a therapy that may slow the disease progression or delay onset. Instead, they concentrate on improving symptom management and enhancing patient care. For example, some trials may seek to address motor deficits by investigating brain-computer interface or eye gaze technology, whereas others aim to advance clinical care through better management of ALS symptoms. Nuedexta is a good example of this. It's a drug used to treat pseudobulbar affect, which can cause uncontrollable laughing or crying, and can also help to improve speech and swallowing in individuals experiencing bulbar symptoms. Nuedexta is available in the US and can be compounded here in Canada. So clinical trials are usually conducted in several structured, we went ahead one. Sorry about that. Clinical trials are usually conducted in several structured phases. The preclinical phase is the basic or fundamental laboratory research that Carolina described earlier. Before moving an experimental treatment to a clinical trial, researchers need to show safety studies in multiple animal models, dosing analyses to be able to properly escalate from laboratory to humans, and a detailed understanding of how the treatment moves through the body, which is particularly important for neurodegenerative diseases because often treatments need to move past the blood-brain barrier and enter into the central nervous system. Phase 1 studies often represent the first time a treatment is being tested in humans. Testing is usually on a small number of people and is designed to assess safety, dosage, and the ideal route of administration. Phase 2 trials involve testing on a larger number of individuals, again for safety and tolerability using the optimal dose regimen determined from phase 1. However, phase 2 studies often don't have the statistical power to determine if a therapy is effective. In a phase 3 study, the potential treatment is then tested in a large enough number of people considered to be sufficient for determining if it will slow progression or have an effect on ALS symptoms, while still assessing safety and tolerability. These are often called registration or pivotal trials because they are aimed at proving or disproving the value of a treatment for use in ALS. And these later stage clinical trials are often placebo-controlled, and those conducting and participating in the study are also blinded, meaning they do not know which participants are receiving the active drug and which are receiving placebo. And this is required to eliminate as much bias as possible from the end results. Okay. So I just wanted to highlight here that there are more pharmaceutical companies than ever invested in ALS research. And these are for-profit companies who would not invest in a disease area if they did not think there was a chance they could make a difference. So it really is promising to see the influx of these companies into the ALS space. And here we just included some key points to consider. Sorry, it's being a bit finicky today. Here we've included some key points to consider regarding clinical trials. So participating in a clinical trial is a way to make a contribution to science and to advance learning. These trials are not created for treatment purposes, but rather to get an answer about an experimental therapeutic. The compassionate design of clinical trials has come a long way, but it is still evolving. For example, many studies will now include something that is called an open label extension, which will provide access to the treatment for everyone, including those who are on placebo after the study has completed. So there are a number of different online resources available to get more information about current and past ALS clinical trials, and we've listed a few of them here. On the ALS Canada website, for example, we have a list of all clinical trials that are active within Canada. There you can find more information about the experimental treatment being tested, the study design, and the participating sites. Another great resource I wanted to share with you is clinicaltrials.gov, which is an online database of clinical research studies worldwide. The website houses up-to-date information from over 200 countries, with new studies being added almost daily. So I'll just provide a quick example for how you can search for a study yourself. When you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you will see this homepage, and there are a few different search filters you can use, such as the condition or disease, intervention or treatment, or location of the study. If, for example, you wanted to see all ALS clinical trials in Canada, you would want to enter amyotrophic lateral sclerosis under the condition or disease and Canada as the location and hit search. This will display all ALS clinical trials, both past and present, with at least one Canadian site, which, as you can see here, there's 73 different studies. If you wanted to narrow it down to only those currently recruiting, you can use the filters on the left-hand side to select the appropriate study status and click Apply Filters. This narrows the list down to 11 studies currently recruiting in Canada. And using the first study here just as an example, when you click on it, you can see there will be a wealth of information. You can learn more about the study sponsor, which is traditionally the pharmaceutical company developing the experimental treatment, as well as the estimated number of people who will be enrolled in the study and what phase it is. You can also see where the clinical trial is taking place. As you see here for this study, it is currently recruiting in Montreal at the Neuro. Finally, you can find information about inclusion and exclusion criteria, which can be helpful when trying to determine if a study may be appropriate for you. The website is pretty user-friendly, but if you ever run into any problems or have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at research@als.ca for more information. We're always here and happy to help. But with that, I'll now turn it over to Dave, who will highlight some other important considerations when it comes to participating in clinical research.
Thank you, Colleen. So we know that people want to contribute and participate in clinical trials. We know that that's a big deal for many people. And so I will switch the slide here. So we wanted to just end off from some of that more structured information with a little bit of pragmatic information for individuals as well. One of the first things is that people often go to an ALS clinic, particularly in Canada. They will be seen by one of the CALS clinics across the country. And they might want to ask their clinician about being involved in clinical trials. And it's important to know that your clinician may not be aware of all the trials that are going on at other clinics. They may be aware of what they're running, and they should be aware of what they're running, but there could be other trials that are happening not only in cities very nearby, other areas in Canada, or even ones that you might be able to participate in other countries. So it's really important that you are your own best advocate. Searching around, coming to things like the 101 to ask questions is really a good way to be able to figure out what's best for you when it comes to participation in a clinical trial. It's also really important to know that all things in clinical trial are truly experimental. If we knew that something was working, it would definitely be given to people. And so part of that means that even when a company might present data and talk about the positive data that they have, if they were sure of that data and they knew for sure that this drug or this therapy was having an effect on people living with ALS, it would be approved by Health Canada, it would be applied to Health Canada, and people would be getting it. So it's just important to know that in all of these cases, we don't actually know if these work when they are in clinical trial. And now some of these will have more scientific backing than others. So you may come to a question and answer with some scientists or to our 101, and we may be able to say, yes, there's some very interesting data that we have in those models that Carolina described earlier, and we are kind of excited about this idea, but we have no clue whether or not this is actually more promising than another therapy that might be in a clinical trial right now. So it's important to know those things when you're participating, just so you have a really balanced set of expectations of what will come out of it. So A few other pragmatic pieces of information is that when you do attend a clinical trial, most of these won't cover travel expenses. So if you're going to another city, for example, to participate, often transportation, accommodation, parking, all of these will need to be covered by the individual who's participating. In some cases, that won't, the company that is running the trial will be able to put that in their budget, and you can ask about that, but it's certainly good to know before you do participate. One of the biggest things is contacting a site before you actually go to it to see if it's even possible to participate. And as you saw from Colleen, she delineated those wonderful resources, and most of those resources will provide really good contact information, emails, phone numbers that you can reach out to first to see whether or not you might be eligible and what are some of those parameters I just mentioned. Now, sometimes if you want to go across the country or to another country to participate in a clinical trial, certain trials won't allow to recruit people from other places. And that's not to try to exclude people. It's because for them to get the scientific answer about the clinical trial they're running, they do sometimes worry about a person's ability to continue to come back to the clinic in the necessary visits that are needed to be able to actually complete the study. And some are less concerned about it, and it really can sometimes even come down to the clinician's discretion as to whether or not someone can be enrolled in a clinical trial. And again, it's important to really find out first that if you're going to travel for a clinical trial, you may need to be screened in person before knowing if you even meet what's called the eligibility criteria. And so sometimes that may require some expense for the individual who wants to participate, even before finding out if they're going to be eligible. One of the things that's sort of myth that often people will talk about is that Canada doesn't have enough clinical trials. Well, in fact, Canada is actually one of the top trial access countries in the world. Typically, it has, third or fourth most of any in the world. And that's just a testament to how many clinical trials are actually happening in the world. There are a lot happening in ALS compared to years past, but it may not be available in every center, and there may not be multiple ones available at all times. But in Canada, we have a national network that has existed for many years called CALS, the Canadian ALS Research Network. And this is a formalized network of clinicians across the country who collaborate all the time together. They talk about best practices and how they're doing care, but they also really work hard to bring the best clinical research and clinical trials here to Canada for opportunities for Canadians to participate. As you can see, its mission is to connect ALS clinical trial centers and improve both patient and clinical participation in clinical research. And there are 22 of these sites across the country. Colleen, who you've heard from just before, also serves as the CALS manager, on top of being the director of Canadian research at ALS Canada. And really, this is a network that is working very hard globally to try to bring those best and most promising clinical trials for Canadians to have the opportunity to participate in. And just an example here of the CALS network, again, a really dedicated group of clinicians across the country who have worked together for many years and continue to evolve and grow in a way that can keep pushing Canada to having the best and most clinical trials that we can have here in the country. So just a couple of last bits of pragmatic information in terms of communications. Again, I mentioned this before. Sometimes you will read press releases about a recent clinical trial result that will have very positive results, and it will sound very promising as to what it can do to help people living with the disease. It's important to be careful about what you read or hear about these things. So pharmaceutical companies at their very base are businesses. Obviously, many people in those companies do want to help people, and they are running those clinical trials because they want to have therapies to help people living with ALS, but they also are businesses seeking for investment to continue to run their research and eventually want to be able to sell their product to people who need it. And so with that often comes a way in which the most positive light is how they are shining their data and interpreting their data. And so it's very important to come to things like our 101 or to talk to a clinician, to other researchers about how the data really reflects what's talked about in those media pieces to get a better understanding of what we know, how exciting it is, and really, if you want to participate in these things, what do we know about these particular therapies and what don't we know? And then probably being even more careful is when you have claims from specific clinics where they talk about, paying to come and get a particular therapy or treatment or particular regimen that can help you with your ALS. And again, this comes back to the very base line that if we knew something worked, we would absolutely get it to you. And that goes across the research community, the clinical community, ALS Canada. We absolutely want to make sure that we are helping people with anything that we know can potentially work for them. We do understand that there's a temptation there because we certainly don't have the answers, and we are still working really hard to get better therapies through clinical trials that can be proven to have a benefit for people living with ALS. And sometimes websites or other avenues will tell you that they will have benefits. They'll have testimonials. They will promise you a certain level of recovery from your disease. But it's also important to note that there are many people out there that are trying to make money off of people living with ALS, as terrible as that is. And there are other options to be able to learn about some of these things that aren't necessarily in formal clinical trials. A really great one is called ALS Untangled. This is a group of clinicians and researchers from around the world who gather together online to sort of talk about what we call off-label therapies. So these are the things that are not typically in traditional clinical trials that someone may have seen on a website or have tried because someone else has tried it, and kind of give you a more balanced, open access review of what their thoughts are on some of the things you see here in terms of, does the mechanism make sense? Have people actually done this and reported good benefits? Has there been any actual clinical trials? And then what are the risks to you in doing this or in accessing some of these particular regimens or treatments? And they actually have a really great one that kind of highlights what I just said in the last slide, called the 10 Red Flags. It's number 56. Highly recommend you to go look at that one. It just gives you an idea of some of the things to look out for to make sure whether or not something you're interested in is sort of a legitimate potential study to try to understand something that can work for ALS, or whether it might potentially be someone who's trying to take advantage and ultimately make money off of people who are living with ALS. So that's it. We really just wanted to give you a brief overview of basic research, clinical research, some of these pragmatic pieces, but we're really hopeful that you'll join us at the 101 that we have once a month. So please do search our webinar section, which you're probably on for this, to find out more about when the next one is. And if you ever have a question, doesn't matter day or night, time of the month, anything, research@als.ca, and we're happy to get back to you to try to help navigate the difficult information landscape on ALS. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you at the 101.